The scorching heat of Iraq's Anbar province pressed down on Navy SEAL Team Delta as they crouched behind a crumbling concrete wall. Petty Officer First Class Maria Gonzalez wiped sweat from her forehead while studying the enemy stronghold through her rifle scope. She had been the first female SEAL to join an active combat team, and after 18 months of proving herself, she still felt the weight of skeptical eyes whenever difficult decisions arose. The mission briefing that morning had seemed straightforward enough. Intelligence reports indicated that 3 American contractors were being held in a heavily fortified compound, approximately 400 meters from their current position. The contractors had been missing for 6 days, and satellite imagery suggested they were still alive but in immediate danger. Time was running out, and this might be their only chance for a successful rescue. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Mike Torres had 22 years of experience and had led more successful operations than anyone could count. He trusted his team completely, but this particular mission presented challenges that made even seasoned operators uncomfortable. The compound sat at the center of what military strategists called a perfect kill zone, an area specifically designed to eliminate anyone foolish enough to enter it. Gonzalez adjusted her body armor and checked her ammunition for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Her teammates, Petty Officers Davis, Williams, and Jackson, were equally nervous, though they tried to hide it behind their usual pre-mission routines. The 4 men had initially been skeptical about working with a female operator, but Gonzalez had earned their respect through consistent performance under pressure. The intelligence officer had been brutally honest about their tactical situation. The compound was surrounded by a 200-meter stretch of completely open ground, with no cover except for a few scattered rocks and the abandoned vehicle that had been destroyed months earlier. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in buildings on 3 sides of the open area, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any approach suicidal. Torres spread detailed photographs across the dusty ground, pointing out enemy positions that had been identified through drone surveillance. At least 12 Taliban fighters were confirmed in the area, armed with automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, and possibly sniper rifles. They had chosen their defensive positions carefully, turning the rescue mission into a tactical nightmare. The original plan called for a diversionary attack from the eastern approach while the main rescue team advanced from the west. Close air support would be available, but the proximity of the hostages made precision strikes impossible. Any mistake in timing or execution would likely result in casualties among both the rescue team and the people they were trying to save. Gonzalez studied the photographs with growing concern. Her training at the Naval Special Warfare Command had prepared her for difficult operations, but this situation seemed designed to test the limits of what was tactically possible. The kill zone was simply too large and too well defended for conventional assault tactics to succeed without massive casualties. The team spent 2 hours developing and discarding various approaches to the problem. Every potential solution required crossing that deadly open ground under heavy enemy fire. Torres considered calling for additional support, but time constraints made that option unrealistic. The contractors were running out of time, and intelligence suggested that their captors were preparing to move them to another location. Williams, the team's communications specialist, received an update that made their situation even more urgent. Intercepted radio communications indicated that the hostages would be executed within hours if no rescue attempt was made. The Taliban fighters were using the contractors as bait, hoping to draw American forces into their carefully prepared trap. Davis, an experienced demolitions expert, suggested using explosive charges to create a diversion, but the team lacked sufficient ordnance to effectively neutralize the enemy positions. Jackson, their medic, worried about treating casualties in such an exposed position if the rescue attempt went badly. Every tactical consideration pointed to the same conclusion: this mission was extremely dangerous. Torres made the difficult decision to request permission to abort the mission. The risk to his team seemed disproportionate to the chances of success, and his responsibility was to bring his people home alive. But as he reached for his radio, Gonzalez placed her hand on his arm and asked him to wait a few more minutes. She had been studying the terrain differently than her teammates, looking for alternatives that might have been overlooked. Her medical training had taught her to consider problems from multiple angles, and she was beginning to see possibilities that weren't immediately obvious to operators focused on conventional assault tactics. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky, which would soon create shadows that might provide some concealment for movement across the open ground. Additionally, the enemy fighters had been in their positions for hours, and human nature suggested that their alertness might be decreasing as the day wore on. Gonzalez proposed a radical departure from standard operating procedures. Instead of attempting a coordinated team assault, she suggested that a single operator could cross the kill zone using speed, timing, and the element of surprise. The idea was simple but extremely dangerous. One person moving fast and unpredictably might reach the compound before the enemy could coordinate an effective response. Torres rejected Gonzalez's proposal immediately and completely. The idea of sending any team member across 200 meters of open ground under enemy observation was tactically insane. He had seen too many good operators die attempting similar heroics, and he refused to sacrifice one of his people on what amounted to a suicide mission. But Gonzalez pressed her argument with quiet persistence. She pointed out that their current tactical situation offered no viable alternatives. The hostages were going to die if no action was taken, and conventional approaches would likely result in casualties among both the rescue team and the contractors. Someone had to take a calculated risk or they would fail their mission entirely. Davis and Williams listened to the debate with growing unease. They understood the logic behind Gonzalez's proposal, but the tactical mathematics were terrifying. Enemy fighters in elevated positions with clear fields of fire across the entire kill zone would have every advantage. Even if someone managed to reach the compound, they would still need to neutralize multiple enemies and extract 3 hostages. Jackson checked his medical supplies nervously, anticipating the casualties that would result from any attempt to cross that deadly ground. His job was to keep the team alive, but there were limits to what battlefield medicine could accomplish. Some wounds were simply too severe to treat in combat conditions, especially when under continued enemy fire. Torres studied the kill zone again through his binoculars, searching desperately for any tactical advantage they might have overlooked. The enemy positions were perfectly situated to create a devastating crossfire that would eliminate anyone attempting to cross the open area. Years of military experience had taught him to recognize impossible situations, and this definitely qualified. "Duai," radio crackled with updates from higher command, increasing pressure on Torres to make a decision. The contractor's situation was deteriorating rapidly, and this might be the last opportunity for a rescue attempt. Intelligence suggested that Taliban fighters were preparing to move their prisoners within hours, which would make any future rescue exponentially more difficult. Gonzalez began preparing her equipment while continuing to argue her case. She stripped unnecessary gear from her tactical vest, keeping only her rifle, essential ammunition, and basic medical supplies. Speed would be her only protection during the crossing, and every ounce of extra weight could mean the difference between life and death. Her teammates watched with a mixture of admiration and horror as she methodically prepared for what they all believed was a suicide mission. Gonzalez had always been thorough in her preparations, but this level of detailed planning for such a dangerous operation demonstrated either exceptional courage or complete insanity. Torres found himself caught between competing responsibilities. Military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and calculated risks, but this situation defied conventional solutions. His duty was to complete the mission while protecting his team, but these objectives seemed mutually exclusive given their current tactical circumstances. The team leader called for input from all team members, seeking consensus on their next course of action. Davis reluctantly supported Gonzalez's plan, admitting that desperate situations sometimes required desperate measures. Williams worried about losing their most experienced medic, but agreed that someone had to act before time ran out completely. Jackson calculated the medical implications of various wounds that could result from crossing the kill zone. His analysis was grimly realistic. Most injuries sustained in that open ground would likely be fatal due to their severity and the impossibility of providing immediate treatment under continued enemy fire. Gonzalez volunteered herself for the dangerous crossing, arguing that her medical training made her the logical choice to treat any wounded hostages. She also pointed out that her smaller physical profile might make her a more difficult target for enemy gunners. Torres strongly opposed this suggestion, but her determination remained unwavering. The radio brought more urgent communications from the compound where the hostages were being held. Intelligence officers had intercepted Taliban communications indicating that the execution timeline had been moved up. The contractors now had less than 2 hours to live unless immediate action was taken. Time pressure mounted as Torres weighed impossible choices. Attempting any rescue operation would put his team at enormous risk, but abandoning the mission meant accepting the certain death of 3 American civilians. Military leadership required making difficult decisions, but this situation tested the limits of acceptable risk. Gonzalez checked her rifle one final time and looked Torres directly in the eye. She told him that she was going to make the crossing regardless of orders, because leaving Americans to die was not an option she could accept. Her voice carried absolute determination as she prepared to step into the kill zone. The team found themselves facing a moment that would define their entire military careers. They could follow doctrine and maintain tactical safety, or they could support a teammate's desperate attempt to save American lives. The choice between military procedure and moral obligation created an almost unbearable tension among the experienced operators. Without waiting for permission, Gonzalez moved to the edge of their concealed position and began her final preparations. She removed her helmet to reduce weight and improve her peripheral vision, knowing that seeing enemy muzzle flashes might provide the split-second warning needed to avoid incoming fire. Her teammates realized that she was actually going to attempt the crossing, regardless of their tactical concerns. Torres made one last desperate attempt to stop her, grabbing her shoulder and reminding her about her family back in Texas. But Gonzalez gently removed his hand and replied that the hostages also had families who deserved to see them come home alive. Mathematical calculations were irrelevant when American lives were at stake. The kill zone stretched before them like a concrete desert, broken only by scattered debris and the hulk of a destroyed vehicle that provided no meaningful cover. Enemy positions were clearly visible in the surrounding buildings, with weapon barrels protruding from windows and doorways. The tactical situation looked even worse from ground level than it had appeared in aerial photographs. Davis positioned himself to provide suppressive fire once Gonzalez began her crossing. His rifle was equipped with a high-powered scope, but the distances and angles involved would make accurate shooting extremely difficult. Williams prepared smoke grenades to deploy at strategic moments, hoping to create enough confusion to disrupt enemy targeting. Jackson opened his medical kit and prepared trauma supplies, anticipating the worst possible outcomes. His hands shook slightly as he arranged bandages and intravenous equipment, knowing that severe wounds sustained in the kill zone would likely be impossible to treat effectively. The medical implications of this mission terrified him more than any enemy fire. Gonzalez took several deep breaths and mentally rehearsed her route across the deadly ground. She had identified 3 potential points where brief cover might be available, though each would provide protection for only seconds, at most. Speed and unpredictable movement patterns would be her primary survival tools. Torres realized that his team member was committed to making this crossing, with or without his support. Military leadership sometimes required supporting subordinates, initiatives even when personal judgment suggested otherwise. He began coordinating with his remaining team members to provide whatever assistance was possible. The afternoon sun created harsh shadows across the kill zone, which might provide minimal concealment but would also create visual confusion for both the runner and enemy gunners. Thermal imaging equipment could negate these advantages, but intelligence reports suggested that Taliban fighters in this area lacked sophisticated targeting technology. Williams established communication with overhead aircraft, requesting immediate, close air support once Gonzalez reached the compound. The timing would be critical. Airstrikes would need to neutralize enemy positions without endangering either the rescue team or the hostages. Coordination mistakes could result in friendly fire casualties. Davis studied enemy positions through his scope, identifying the most dangerous threats that would need to be neutralized during the crossing. At least 4 separate firing positions had clear lines of sight across the entire kill zone. making suppressive fire coordination extremely complex. Each enemy position would require individual attention. Gonzalez checked her rifle one final time and ensured that her ammunition magazines were secured, but easily accessible. She would need to be able to return fire immediately upon reaching the compound, assuming she survived the crossing. Weapon malfunctions during this operation would be catastrophic. The radio crackled with intercepted enemy communications, translated by intelligence officers monitoring Taliban frequencies. Enemy fighters were aware that American forces were in the area and were preparing for possible rescue attempts. This meant that Surprise was already compromised, making the crossing even more dangerous. Torres made the command decision to support Gonzalez's unauthorized mission fully. If she was determined to make this crossing, his remaining team members would provide every possible advantage through coordinated suppressive fire and tactical diversions. Sometimes leadership meant supporting courage rather than constraining. Jackson positioned himself to provide immediate medical treatment if Gonzalez was wounded during the crossing, but managed to reach cover. His location would allow him to move quickly to her position if needed, though he knew that medical treatment under heavy enemy fire would be extremely difficult. Williams coordinated with Davis to ensure that suppressive fire would be continuous throughout the crossing attempt. Enemy gunners would need to be kept under constant pressure to disrupt their accuracy and prevent coordinated fire. The margin for error was essentially non-existent. Gonzalez looked at each of her teammates one final time, seeing fear and determination in their eyes. They thought she was attempting the impossible, and she wasn't entirely certain they were wrong. But sometimes being a warrior meant accepting impossible odds when the alternative was abandoning fellow Americans. The moment of truth arrived with terrifying suddenness. Gonzalez sprinted from cover without any dramatic countdown, relying on Surprise to provide her first few seconds of protection. The kill zone erupted in gunfire almost immediately, as enemy fighters adjusted their weapons toward the unexpected target racing across the open ground. Bullets immediately began impacting the ground around Gonzalez as she zigzagged across the kill zone at maximum speed. Her unconventional route confused the enemy gunners initially, but they quickly began adjusting their fire to intercept her movement patterns. Dust clouds erupted where high-velocity rounds struck the concrete, creating a deadly storm around her running figure. Davis opened fire from his position, targeting enemy muzzle flashes with precision shots designed to disrupt, rather than necessarily kill. His rifle barked steadily as he walked suppressive fire across multiple enemy positions, forcing Taliban fighters to take cover, instead of maintaining accurate fire on Gonzalez's position. Williams deployed smoke grenades in a careful sequence, creating patches of concealment that masked Gonzalez's exact location without completely obscuring the target area. Too much smoke would prevent Davis from providing effective covering fire, while too little would leave her completely exposed to enemy gunners. Halfway across the kill zone, Gonzalez dove behind the destroyed vehicle as automatic weapons fire intensified around her position. The twisted metal provided minimal protection, but it allowed her a few precious seconds to catch her breath and assess the remaining distance to the compound. Enemy fire was becoming more accurate as gunners adjusted to her speed and movement patterns. Torres coordinated the suppressive fire mission while monitoring Gonzalez's progress through binoculars. He could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different enemy positions, indicating a much larger defensive force than intelligence had estimated. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, but Gonzalez had already committed to the crossing. Jackson prepared to provide immediate medical support if Gonzalez reached the compound, but sustained injuries during the crossing. His medical supplies were organized for rapid treatment of gunshot wounds, though he knew that serious injuries would be difficult to treat under continued enemy fire. Enemy fighters began concentrating their fire on the destroyed vehicle, attempting to eliminate Gonzalez while she was temporarily stationary. Bullets sparked off the metal frame and shattered what remained of the windows, creating a deadly environment that made remaining in position impossible. She would need to continue her crossing or be eliminated. Gonzalez burst from behind the vehicle without warning, continuing her sprint toward the compound entrance. Her unexpected movement caught enemy gunners off guard again, providing several seconds of reduced accuracy as they adjusted their fire. But the remaining distance was the most dangerous part of her route, with multiple enemy positions having clear shots at her destination. Williams coordinated with overhead aircraft to provide close air support, but the proximity of hostages made precision strikes impossible. Pilots could only provide intimidation flights to distract enemy gunners, hoping to reduce their accuracy through psychological pressure rather than direct engagement. Davis shifted his suppressive fire to cover Gonzalez's final approach, targeting enemy positions with the best angles on the compound entrance. His ammunition was running low, but he continued providing covering fire with mechanical precision. Every shot was carefully placed to maximize disruption of enemy targeting efforts. The compound entrance loomed ahead as Gonzalez covered the final 50 meters under intense enemy fire. Her legs burned from the sprint, but adrenaline carried her forward as bullets whistled past her head. The concrete walls offered salvation if she could reach them before enemy gunners achieved a direct hit. Torres watched through binoculars as his team member approached the compound, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether her desperate gamble succeeded or failed catastrophically. Enemy fire was intensifying as multiple gunners concentrated on her final approach route. Jackson monitored radio communications for any indication that Gonzalez had been hit during the crossing. His medical training had taught him to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best, but the intensity of enemy fire made survival seem almost miraculous. Gonzalez reached the compound entrance just as enemy gunfire reached its peak intensity. She dove through the doorway as bullets shattered the concrete frame above her head, creating a shower of debris that followed her into the building. Inside, she found herself face to face with 3 terrified American contractors who couldn't believe anyone had survived crossing that deadly zone. The hostages were in worse condition than intelligence reports had indicated. 2 were suffering from dehydration and malnutrition, while the third showed signs of physical abuse from his captors. All 3 were psychologically traumatized from their ordeal, but they were alive and capable of movement with assistance. Williams established communication with Gonzalez inside the compound, confirming that she had survived the crossing and successfully reached the hostages. Her voice was steady despite the physical exhaustion from her sprint, and she quickly began assessing the tactical situation inside the enemy stronghold. Enemy fighters outside the compound began repositioning to prevent any extraction attempt, realizing that their trap had been partially compromised. They maintained positions covering the kill zone, while also preparing to assault the compound directly if necessary. The tactical balance had shifted, but the situation remained extremely dangerous. Inside the compound, Gonzalez quickly established a defensive perimeter while assessing the hostages' condition and ability to move. The 3 contractors were weak but mobile, though they would need assistance during any extraction attempt. She distributed water from her supplies and began planning their escape route, while enemy gunfire continued outside. The compound structure was more complex than aerial photography had revealed, with multiple rooms and defensive positions that could be used to advantage. Gonzalez identified firing ports that would allow her to engage enemy positions while protecting the hostages. The building had been constructed as a defensive position, which now worked in their favor. Torres made the critical decision to commit his entire team to the extraction operation. Gonzalez's successful crossing had demonstrated that the mission was possible, though still extremely dangerous. He coordinated with Davis, Williams, and Jackson to plan a sequential crossing that would reinforce her position and facilitate the hostage extraction. Davis volunteered to make the next crossing, carrying additional ammunition and supplies that Gonzalez would need to hold the compound until the full extraction could be completed. His experience with explosive devices would also be valuable if they needed to breach walls or eliminate enemy positions through demolitions. Williams prepared communication equipment for the crossing, enabling better coordination with air support and higher command once he reached the compound. Clear communications would be essential for timing the extraction and ensuring that close air support could be delivered without endangering the rescue team or hostages. Jackson organized medical supplies for treating the hostages once he reached the compound. His assessment would determine whether they were capable of making the return crossing under their own power or would need to be carried. Medical considerations would significantly impact their extraction planning. Gonzalez coordinated with her team while maintaining defensive positions inside the compound. Enemy fighters were testing their perimeter with probing attacks, trying to determine the strength of the American position. She returned fire selectively, conserving ammunition while demonstrating that the compound was now defended. The hostages provided information about enemy positions and strength based on their observations during captivity. This intelligence was invaluable for planning the extraction and identifying threats that might not be visible from outside the compound. Their information confirmed that at least 15 Taliban fighters were involved in the operation. Torres coordinated the sequential crossings with precise timing, ensuring that suppressive fire would be continuous throughout each team member's movement across the kill zone. The enemy had adjusted their tactics following Gonzalez's crossing, making subsequent attempts more dangerous as they anticipated additional rescue efforts. Davis began his crossing using a different route than Gonzalez had taken, hoping to confuse enemy gunners who were now watching for movement patterns. His larger frame made him a more visible target, but his explosive expertise would be crucial for the extraction phase of the mission. Enemy fire intensified as Davis crossed the kill zone, but the continued suppressive fire from Torres and Williams disrupted enemy accuracy enough to allow him to reach the compound safely. His arrival doubled the defensive firepower available to protect the hostages and hold the position. Jackson prepared for his crossing while monitoring communications from the compound. Gonzalez and Davis had established a strong defensive position, but they would need additional medical supplies and communications equipment to sustain their position and plan the extraction effectively. Williams coordinated with overhead aircraft to provide maximum distraction during Jackson's crossing. Combat aircraft made low passes over enemy positions, forcing Taliban fighters to take cover and reducing their ability to concentrate fire on the crossing route. Jackson completed his crossing successfully, bringing essential medical equipment and communication gear that transformed the tactical situation inside the compound. With 3 SEALs and vital supplies now in position, the extraction phase of the mission could begin in earnest. Gonzalez coordinated with her newly arrived teammates to plan the hostage extraction. The contractors were in better condition than initially feared, and all 3 appeared capable of making the return crossing with assistance. Medical treatment had stabilized their condition enough to permit careful movement. The team established overlapping fields of fire from inside the compound, creating a defensive position that could suppress enemy gunners during the extraction attempt. Their combined firepower was sufficient to provide covering fire for the hostages' movement across the kill zone. Torres remained in his original position to coordinate close air support and maintain communication with higher command. His overwatch position would be crucial for timing the extraction and ensuring that suppressive fire was delivered at the right moments to protect the returning personnel. Enemy fighters began preparing for a direct assault on the compound, realizing that their trap had been compromised and that the Americans were planning an extraction. This created time pressure for the rescue team, as they needed to begin the extraction before enemy reinforcements could arrive or a direct assault could be launched. The extraction began with careful preparation of the hostages for their movement across the kill zone. Gonzalez distributed protective equipment and ensured that each contractor understood the movement plan and their individual responsibilities during the crossing. Clear communication would be essential for survival during the next few minutes. Davis rigged explosive charges to create diversionary blasts that would confuse enemy gunners and mask the exact timing of the extraction attempt. The explosions would also create dust clouds that might provide additional concealment during the critical moments when the hostages were most exposed. Jackson administered stimulants to the weakest hostage, providing artificial energy that would enable him to maintain the pace required for crossing the kill zone. Medical ethics normally prohibited such treatment, but survival considerations overrode standard protocols in this extreme situation. Williams established final communication, checks with Torres and overhead aircraft, coordinating the precise timing of suppressive fire, diversionary explosions, and close air support. Every element of the extraction had to be synchronized perfectly to maximize the chances of success. The first hostage began his crossing accompanied by Gonzalez, who provided physical support while maintaining the ability to return fire if necessary. Their movement triggered intense enemy fire, but the coordinated suppressive fire and diversionary explosions created enough confusion to mask their exact location. Torres provided overwatch fire with surgical precision, targeting enemy gunners, who achieved the best firing positions on the crossing route. His shots were carefully placed to neutralize immediate threats without depleting ammunition needed for the remaining extractions. Davis detonated his prepared charges in sequence, creating multiple explosions that forced enemy fighters to take cover and disrupted their ability to coordinate effective fire. The psychological impact of the explosions added to the confusion created by smoke and suppressive fire. The first hostage and Gonzalez reached Torres's position safely, demonstrating that the extraction plan was viable despite the extreme dangers involved. The successful crossing provided hope and momentum for the remaining extractions, though each subsequent attempt would face increasingly alert enemy gunners. Jackson began the second extraction with another hostage, following a slightly different route to prevent enemy gunners from predicting movement patterns. His medical training proved valuable as he provided physical assistance to the weakened contractor while maintaining tactical awareness. Williams coordinated close air support to provide maximum distraction during the second crossing. Combat aircraft made intimidating passes directly over enemy positions, forcing Taliban fighters to take cover and reducing their ability to maintain accurate fire on the extraction route. The second hostage extraction succeeded, despite intensified enemy fire, with Jackson and his charge reaching safety after a harrowing sprint across the deadly ground. 2 successful crossings had proven that the extraction was possible, though the final attempt would be the most dangerous. Davis prepared for the final extraction with the remaining hostage, and Williams providing communication support. Fighters were now fully alert and concentrated on preventing any additional successful crossings. This final attempt would face the most organized and determined resistance. Torres coordinated all available suppressive fire for the final extraction, knowing that this would be the most critical moment of the entire mission. Every weapon system available was focused on disrupting enemy fire during those crucial seconds when the last hostage would be most vulnerable. The final extraction began with maximum suppressive fire and diversionary explosions creating chaos among enemy positions. Davis and the last hostage moved across the kill zone under the heaviest enemy fire of the entire operation, but coordinated American firepower kept them alive long enough to reach safety. All 3 hostages and the entire SEAL team reached the extraction point successfully, completing what had seemed like an impossible mission just hours earlier. The operation's success was attributed to exceptional teamwork, but every team member knew that Gonzalez's initial crossing had been the crucial moment that made everything else possible. Helicopter extraction proceeded under heavy enemy fire, but all personnel were successfully evacuated without casualties. The contractors were transported to medical facilities for treatment, while the SEAL team was debriefed about their unconventional but successful tactics. The mission report officially credited the rescue's success to innovative tactics and exceptional courage under fire. Gonzalez received the Navy Cross for her actions, becoming one of the first female SEALs to be recognized with such a high decoration for combat valor. The 3 rescued contractors made complete recoveries and returned to their families, crediting their survival to the courage of the SEAL team that refused to abandon them. Their testimonies highlighted how Gonzalez's decision to cross the kill zone had saved their lives when conventional tactics had failed. Gonzalez continued her service with SEAL teams, but her reputation was forever changed by that single act of courage. She was no longer the female operator trying to prove herself among elite warriors, but rather a proven combat veteran whose judgment and courage were respected without qualification. The tactical lessons from the mission were studied throughout the special operations community, demonstrating how individual courage could overcome seemingly impossible tactical disadvantages. The operation became a case study in adaptive leadership and the importance of supporting subordinates' initiatives when conventional approaches fail. Years later, when asked about her decision to cross the kill zone, Gonzalez would simply say that abandoning fellow Americans was never an option she could accept. Her willingness to risk everything for people she had never met embodied the warrior ethos that defines America's Special Operations Forces.